Welcome to the Women on the Wall radio show, today live in Arlington on a beautiful February morning. I'm here in studio today with our producer, Josh, and kind of winging it by myself today because our Alice is actually on the road a little bit later on today. She had some family business that was really important she needed to take care of. So she's going to be calling in to discuss all the important education issues today, and we'll bring her on in just a few moments. We're just really happy to be here and excited to learn some of the important things that are going on today in our nation. Josh, you want to bring her on?
Hi, thank you so much, and thank you for opening the show, Rebecca. You did a great job.
Oh, thanks.
There is indeed a lot going on, and it seems like each week when we show up on Thursdays to do these shows, there's always something big happening, and big because it affects our children and our grandchildren and their future.
Yes.
And we have another very special guest, and she's been on with us before, and we're just excited to have her back on, especially now that we've really been diving into her book. Our special guest is Robin Eubanks, the author of Credentialed to Destroy: How and Why Education Became a Weapon. And Robin also writes on a blog. It's a very important blog for people to know about, and it is the InvisibleSurfCollar.com. At the InvisibleSurfCollar.com. And what you'll find when you start diving into the research and the information that Robin has written about both in her book and in her blog, when you start reading her blog daily, you see things happening from her book in real time. And as a mom of 3 children, frankly, it scares the hell out of me.
Yes, it should.
But it also gives me hope and courage to understand the big picture. And as we've said before, Rebecca, our goal is to take parents and communities on a journey from asking, can I see what you're teaching my child, to I can see what you're teaching my child. I can see how you're teaching my child. I can also see who's financially benefiting from the curriculum products that my child's teacher is being evaluated on, and I can see who's financially benefiting and in power and control over my child's life. And as a mother, I will do everything I can, as I know you feel the same way, Rebecca, to expose the truth. And so with that, I'd like to welcome to the show Robin Eubanks. Are you there, Robin?
I am. Thanks for having me on.
Hi, Robin.
Oh. Thank you.
Do I sound okay? Not like a phone?
You do.
Okay.
You don't. You sound great. And we got to meet Robin in person in St. Louis a couple of weeks ago and really talk to her. And I'll tell you, Rebecca, I don't know if you feel the same way I do, but it just opened my eyes to so much more than just reading a book or even having you on the show. Getting to meet you and really talk to you was wonderful. So thank you for joining us.
Yes.
It was my pleasure. I'm glad I got to meet everybody.
Great. And let's kind of dive in. I know we've got listeners who will listen to the show and listen to this podcast who haven't read the book or don't know you yet. And so let me take just a minute or two to have you introduce yourself, Robin, and tell folks about your history, what brought you into this, and why you're still in the fight, frankly.
I'm like you. I'm a mother. I've got 3 children as well, and so I'm in this kind of accidentally. I'm an attorney by training and experience, and kind of accidentally stumbled across this story after I had decided to stay home for a little while. And the more I understood the implications of what I was looking at, like you, it scared me. And the only way out is to describe what's going on, because at the level I talk about it in the book and on the blog, there's not a dispute about what's going on. I don't write about stuff until I not only know what's going on, but in my head I figured out why and how it fits in. And at that point, we get to talk about it. It involves us. It involves our kids. It involves our tax money. In general, most of my sites involve people who are public officials or politically powerful, and they have said what they intend to do using our schools. They've said what it's tied to, and that's what I talk about. And I give lots of sites, and I am surprised by how fast this is coming. I knew from the book what the ultimate vision was, but I'm getting where things that I had not heard of 3 weeks ago are now becoming more and more relevant. You and I talked before we started the interview that I had 2 documents that, as I went through the various newsletters I monitored this morning, it pulled up 2 documents that are pertinent to what's going on. One out of the Economic Development Administration in Washington, and another one, the Commission on Inclusive Prosperity. And if you get into the document, it explains exactly how education, K through 12 education, ties in and what their ultimate vision is. So you can't just look at education. It's really a means to a broader vision, and so I talk about that as well.
And let's kind of break down for people where we're at right now, and what we know is there is this fundamental shift, a transformation, if you will, in education from an education of opportunity where children learn to read, write, do math, know history, are tested on knowledge based on what a teacher has taught them, to an education of equity based on attitudes, values, and beliefs. And when we say attitudes, values, and beliefs, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're not talking about social issues. We're not talking about, liberal indoctrination as some have described what's happening in education. It is a shift to where those in power want to control the attitudes, values, and behaviors of the next generation of children. Is that correct?
The way I describe it is every bit of content that is coming is either a basic skill needed to do a basic low-level job, or it's designed to guide perception, so that how you see the world is influenced by those deliberately created attitudes, those deliberately pushed values. It may be embedded in the gaming emphasis that we're seeing more and more for the K through 12 classroom, where the virtual reality will involve you role-playing in situations that will then influence how you see the world going forward. So it's not trying to, as you said, it's not trying to indoctrinate you as in only teaching one side of the issue. It's not teaching a whole lot of content, and what content there is very much trying to get you to imagine yourself in real life situations where there are problems, and having you come up with the ideas of how to change the existing world.
And And let's talk a little bit about the strategies and tactics of how they have implemented this. In your book, you talk about that this is actually the third radical education reform, the first being in the 60s, the second being in the late 80s, early 90s, and then this latest version, which is really all the same progressive strategy. It's just being implemented. And one of the things that I think is so fascinating in reading your book is that there has been just enough time between the last radical ed reform in the late 80s, early 90s to today, where the people who are in positions of power, elected officials, education, educrats, young superintendents, it's been just long enough for them not to have known and understood the battle against what was outcome-based education back in the 80s and 90s. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to describe it. The first version came in with the original federalization of education. We've got the rewrite going on right now, but the original Elementary and Secondary Education Act was 1965. All of that federal funding is what kicked it in. The first attempt, it was part of Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society vision. It went over like a ton of bricks, and in the 70s you had basically what was called the RAND Change Agent Survey. Spent 5 years, lots of taxpayer dollars trying to figure out why the 60s attempt didn't make it all the way into the classroom. So coming out of the 70s, you have this idea that next time we're going to target the implementation. They did that in the 90s, but it was mostly at the federal level, and outcomes-based education wasn't well understood. There's a big controversy. They didn't get it all into effect, but there are lots of places in this country that never have moved away from outcomes-based education that they went to in the 90s. What we didn't have coming out of the 90s is the full workforce training focus, what was called school to work in the 90s. They didn't get that fully in place. And the other element they didn't get fully in place is they need what are called performance assessments. This focus of outcomes-based education, when you take it all the way through, that's focused on changing values, attitudes, and beliefs, and really concentrates on behavior and guiding perception, it does not do well if you still have old-fashioned tests of knowledge. So they need to shift to some sort of performance assessments where writing the paper, doing the project, doing the online gaming, whatever is the assessment. And so all of those things were basically put in place from about 2009 on, and that's what's going on right now. And it's all coming literally like a freight train and very fast, almost like, I mean, we talked about this in St. Louis. It's as if everything is being pushed into place before anybody can notice, before anyone can object, before anyone who notices it can get other people to say, look at these fundamental changes. And what's fascinating, though, is when you look at the details and you understand the overall template, it's like everywhere you look is designed to be a piece of this puzzle.
And you're exactly right. And it's really fascinating. I want to kind of walk through for people, the term Common Core. People hear Common Core national standards. In Texas, we say, we passed a law that says no to Common Core. But yet, all these other pieces to the puzzle are clearly being inputted in our state. And so one of the things that I read that you wrote is that Common Core is really the red herring. And what we're not paying attention to, what we're not finding out about is one, the WIOA, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and then you've got what you were talking about before, the reauthorization of ESA, the Education or the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which is also tied to the No Child Left Behind. And all of these acts, or pieces of legislation, if you will, are mandating education initiatives. Am I correct on that? And can you talk a little bit about how, while Common Core is not here in Texas, they had to implement WIOA, and then the next step was the ESEA. Is that all correct? And can you kind of clarify?
Okay, the Common Core national standards basically have two purposes. One is to take what we call it K through 12, kindergarten through 12th grade, and turn it into what they call a P through 16 or P through 20 system, which means preschool through college or preschool through graduate school system, where they're all talking to each other, and basically the student, your child, is basically taking taxpayer funding and passing it out to all these interest groups in the name of education. So if you think of it that way, a lot of things start falling into place. The other thing you get from Common Core is a shift away from an emphasis on the mental to an emphasis on behavior. When you hear performance standards, they're talking about performance as in action, behavior. And so Texas already had both of those elements in place. And so, yes, they don't have the Common Core, but they do have performance standards. They do have WIOA. President Obama's positive school climate executive order is also incorporated into every classroom in Texas. The way I describe the Common Core is, if you think of Common Core as a bucket, it kind of obscures all of these real changes that are being put into place either under federal law, under regulatory actions, under interpretations of federal disabilities laws, under interpretations of federal civil rights laws, all these things that the normal person isn't likely to be looking at, but yet they have the power to bind what goes on in the classroom involving your child. And by looking at, because I'm a lawyer, that's just how I think. So once this became an area of interest to me, I started saying, okay, who's got the power and what are they saying you got to do? And that's my focus in the book. It's my focus on the blog. It's the way I describe it to people. In order to make it binding, remember, it didn't turn out well it didn't turn out as desired in the 60s. It didn't go fully into place in the 90s. In order to get it fully in place this time, all of these attempts involve who has binding power over students in the classroom and other areas. If it's binding, it's traceable. There has to be something that made it binding. So much of what I'm doing these days is monitoring all of the various groups I know who have binding authority, who I know are tied into a total vision. And when I started going through my morning newsletters, I mean that. I'm like watching what's coming out of these agencies in real time, and I'm in shock about how fast this is happening. It's just bam, 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 and a lot of it has come out since the beginning of this year, calendar year 2015, and it all fits. And in a lot of instances, it's referring to each other. And we call it K through 12 education, but like in the link I was telling you about from the U.S. Economic Development Administration, they just call it workforce development. So unless you've made that transition that what we call K through 12 education to a politician now is workforce development, and that it's tied into the economic development vision, and oh, by the way, the state the members are all being told that they get to plan the economy, and aren't their contributors really excited about that? And until we start realizing all these elements of the vision, we're just kind of gasping for air, going, why? And, you know, when you know how it fits, then you can ask the proper questions, and then you can be paid. You know, lots of people who've read my book and have read the blog, what they're saying is, now I watch what's going on in my state. Now I'm paying attention to what the city council's doing, and yes, I can see all of the different elements coming into place, and then you're in a position to do something.
Right, exactly. And I want to let folks know about what's happening right now in Washington is the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which, as you were saying, Robin, passed originally in 1965, I believe, and then that's tied to the No Child Left Behind. This is a reauthorization, and I want to play, Josh, I believe you have the clip from our conference call last night with Anita Hogue, who is another mom from Pennsylvania who back in the 90s fought against this type of assessment and testing, behavioral testing in Pennsylvania. But what she talked about on our conference call last night was some language in this education, or the ESEA. So Josh, let's play that clip, and then I want to talk to Robin about it and look at what the reality is on the ground in each of our states.
Okay, the first thing I want to point out in HR5, since this is the most pressing agenda today, and why I say that is that this bill has been voted out of committee, House. So this is why it is very urgent that I talk to you about what I found in this bill last night. This bill is 600 pages long. It is not anything like the Senate version. And what I believe is going to happen, since the Senate version explains very clearly of all the remediation that is going to take place in the mental health area. And when I say mental health area, they refer constantly throughout the bill about the non-cognitive or non-academic social, emotional, and behavioral development of your children. This is the big agenda. Now, in the waivers, this was included in the waivers. So your state may be experiencing how a lot of the mental health agenda is being implemented in the schools. And it's things called response to intervention, positive behavioral interventions and support, specialized student support. All of these things are the remediation under Special Ed funds called IDEA, Individual Disabilities and Education Act. So the whole bill just explains that whole area of how the control will come. It does go into vouchers and the choice legislation down, because page 552 is probably the most dramatic change in representative government that I have read in any bill ever in over the 25 years. What this bill does is create a constitutional crisis, and there is no doubt. HR5 removes states' rights, removes the parent as the final arbiter in bringing up the upbringing of their children, and wrestles complete control of private and religious education through federal encroachment. So when you go to 552, this is what it says. First of all, they call it states to retain rights and authorities that they do not expressly waive, but it's called the restoration of state sovereignty over public education. So it sounds like it's something great, doesn't it? Restoring state sovereignty, parental rights over education, but you have to read the whole section. What it says, and I will quote, that the state is not under no obligation to actually implement or obey any part of this law. However, there is a condition of receiving the grant established under this act. And what it says is, unless the legislature in the state expressly approves the program, and if they do accept these federal funds, they will, and I'm going to quote, waive their state's rights and authorities to not comply with the law. So what it actually means is that if your state accepts ESA, No Child Left Behind reauthorization, that they will waive their state's rights and authority. Now in the second section, on the next page, on page 553, it says there's an amendment of terms to receipt of these federal monies. And this is what it says, that this approval, okay, they want, if the state by law expressly approves ESA, okay, the state has to approve that they're going to take the money. This approval can be accomplished by a vote in their state budget that includes the use of these federal funds, and in the state budget they must expressly include any requirement that is imposed as a condition of receiving money from this grant. The state legislature is expressly approving the grant, and in doing so, waiving the state's rights and authorities to act outside of this law. I hope everyone realizes what I just said. What I just said, and it's in this bill, is that if your state takes this money, they actually relieve all their states' rights and all of their authorities to the federal government.
We had people on our conference call last night just blown away and in arms over this. I was getting text messages, and what is interesting is if you follow your blog, I believe it was last week or the week before, you were talking about what you are using the term progressive federalism, and the vision of what the Constitution is to mean. Can you talk a little bit about this and clarify what she's saying, and explain to us about what this really is, and if it's taking the law out of the hands of the courts and usurping the individual and an individual's right.
Yeah, I had somebody Tuesday night had sent me that page 552, and my reading of it is it has a nice heading that makes it seem like the states are autonomous, so that the talking point for the House is, hey, we're giving the power back to the states. And but then the language turns around, and just accepting the funds in the budget brings in all of the accompanying terms involving those funds. And so it basically, they're all incorporated by reference. Just the fact that the funds are listed as being things in your state budget, and all the legislature did was all go out to lunch, come back and approve the budget, and never thought anything about it. We're bound. That's it. That's all it takes. It's just incorporating the federal funds in that state budget and then approving that budget. The way I read that language. And progressive federalism is a concept that's pushed by the American Constitution Society. It was news to me. They had a convention in 2005 at Yale, and it came up in some of my reading when I happen to live in what's called the League of Innovative Schools District. It's a White House initiative cutting edge, which means that I can be sitting there and I'm hearing pretty much cutting edge sort of stuff, except for I'm hearing it through the lens of actually understanding the big picture. So it's a nice way for me to get to follow things in real time. So I came home from one of those meetings and pulled a book called Democratic Schooling that had been written in the 80s by a man named James Comer, who incidentally helped start what's called the Center for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning that's now in Chicago. And the book talked about progressive federalism, and I'm thinking, boy, that sounds like a concept that could be a lot of trouble if it was still around. Let me look it up. And out pours this book called The Constitution in 2020, this conference, the fact there was a follow-up conference in 2009, and I got the book. I discovered that there's another term involving beyond progressive federalism, and progressive federalism is that the local government, the state government, and the federal government should be working together to bring about the achievement of the progressive vision. And the progressive vision, again, is that everybody should have their basic needs met, and it's not really a vision where everybody's middle class anymore. Everybody is roughly the same class, and you get vouchers for apartments, you get vouchers for your health care. It's not really, it treats the whole world as being a fixed pie. That's the progressive vision. So I was really alarmed about that. I did some more checking and discovered that there's another term, and I didn't come up with this. It's called polyphonic, P-O-L-Y-P-H-O-N-I-C. And the idea is that these various levels of government are going to work together and not be like a layer cake that is separate, but more like a stew. And the polyphonic is meant to say they're not distinct levels anymore. They're all pulling in a common direction, like a glorious chorus trying to achieve these progressive ends. And needless to say, and the number one example of an area where we have progressive or polyphonic federalism turns out to be K-12 education. And with No Child Left Behind being kind of what's held out to be the seminal effort. Well, to say that was an uh-oh moment for me would be putting it mildly. And everything we're seeing going on, though, fits that vision. And the idea that the Congress would basically make it look like they're giving the states autonomy and on the one hand and take it away so that basically inadvertently approving a budget that had the ESA funds in it, which, you know, is a huge part of any state's budget, that would magically bind you to everything in those 600 pages. That's very much par for the course for this progressive federalist vision, which is nothing is going to get in our way. We think the courts would be too slow, so our vision of the Constitution is going to be that executive power, be it mayors, presidents, governors, or regulatory agencies, legislatures, they're the ones that act to achieve the progressive vision. So, you know, you'll get people that are like going, why do we don't have to worry about what goes on in Paris at the end of 2015 because the U.S. Congress would never approve it. Well, if the U.S. Congress doesn't approve it, but every city council and every mayor is putting it into effect at their level, and the various federal agencies are incorporating it into the terms of grants, and all of these things that we do know that are going on, the fact that technically Congress never approved the treaty is not going to protect the average citizen. They're going to treat it as being something they're putting into effect and start running. So that's what we're seeing at every level from city councils to mayors to legislatures. And understanding this, if I get an opportunity to be in the room, I go for it, and I'll sit there and listen and try to put it all together and ask questions. And I've put it to state legislatures before and said, isn't it true that the reason you can't get any traction involving opposition to Common Core is that it's really about workforce development, and it's tied to economic development. And they look at me like they'd like to slice off my head, and then they say, well, yes. And I say, okay, thanks for the soundbite, But that's what I mean. When you start to understand how it all fits, there's not a dispute going on. The only dispute seems to be that we the typical person, isn't supposed to understand how it all fits. But we do. And so...
Well, and maybe that's our hope, because we're willing to look, to take the time to look because of our kids, because this directly impacts our kids. And I've been kind of taken over. Rebecca or Josh, do y'all have any questions? I have a couple more, but I want to give you time to ask some questions if you've got some questions.
Well, as usual, my head is just spinning because it's just incredible to me how far this has gotten and how bad it is. And I'm just so grateful that, people like Robin are out there really, doing all this research and interpreting what's going on for us, because quite frankly, it is so intense and complicated. So thanks, Robin. And every time I've listened to you, I've just, come away astounded at the things you've discovered. So I'm just trying to understand everything you've said and, praying. Basically just sitting here praying. So I have no questions. I just need to spend a lot of time trying to understand it all.
Right. Josh, what about you?
Josh, I think Josh is about in the same place here. We're just shaking our head, in disbelief.
Well, we talk about it being complicated, and I will say it was complicated to figure out. Mm-hmm. But it's not a complicated story anymore.
Right.
It's school to work.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I was a history major. Throughout history, the norm is that economic power and political power will collude if they get a chance. Mm-hmm. That's the history. Yeah. So when people say, "Oh, that can't be going on," you just want to go, "Really? Really?" Let's think about any place that individuals got to pursue their own interests. It was always places like Britain or the Netherlands or Hong Kong where political power couldn't stop them. It's not that anybody ever said, "Oh, this is a good model. Go for it. I won't bother you." No, that's not how it worked. And so it is imaginable. It is what is going on, and it's not okay. And dragging it into the sunlight is the way out. And if everybody would just look at their state legislator and ask the question I did, we'd get a lot more control over K through 12 education, because that's a valid question, and it is all tied together under these plans that we weren't ever supposed to look at. I've talked about, I accidentally heard about WIOA from a very radical civil rights group whose stuff I monitor, and it was basically doing a victory lap. And knowing what all the other things that were part of their vision, and having listened to their president, Wade Henderson, in June, say he wasn't going to let the Constitution get in the way of achieving their vision for the future, I said, "What's in this legislation?" And I found a copy of it, and was just shocked by what was laid out in it. And it went flying through the Senate, I think like 98-2. I think there were 5 people who objected in the House, but nobody would write about it. Nobody's covered. I've written about it. The Council on Foreign Relations, the day after it was passed, said, "Oh, we're really pleased about this vision." Nobody else will talk about it, because the idea that basically the state governors and the state various interest groups are going to do economic planning and treat K through 12 as workforce development and give all these special privileges to people who don't speak English or economically deprived, all these other, I called it was their economic justice categories. If you met any of those, you're going to get extra special treatment for a very long time under WIOA. And I call it WIOA because there are lots of conferences and webinars going on in Washington, D.C. now, getting ready for WIOA to go into effect. The states have to file their plans. Some of them are filing them in March. They have to file it with the Federal Department of Labor, and they have to file it with the Federal Department of Education for approval. So they've got to lay out what their visions are. They've got to describe who they're appointing to the boards. It has to include chambers of commerce. It has to include people from community colleges. It has to include community organizing groups. It's quite a group of people, and nobody will talk about it. It's our tax money. It's our communities. It's our children involved. It is an untenable, unworkable, long-term, unfeasible vision, and it's being put in place this year in every state.
And it's in every state, and it's being put in place using our money, our tax dollars. You know, I want to connect some dots for people here in Texas. You know, we said no to the Common Core national standards, but yet this morning, Commissioner Michael Williams was on an Austin radio show, and they were asking him why our new math teaks are so much like Common Core, and it's that they're implementing this vision, exactly what you're talking about. And he said it specifically. He said that the new assessments and the new way that children are learning are using, you know, these new teaching strategies. Well, we said no to the teaching strategies, but as you're saying, the way that they're implementing it is at the very local, their implementation is at the local level, but the power and control is coming from the federal level. And so as parents, we listen to Michael Williams, who's supposed to be a conservative Republican, by the way, and the guys who are reauthorizing ESEA are Republicans again. They're implementing this. So we have to understand clearly that this is not a Republican versus Democrat, conservative versus Republican. This is a power of the elite and the politically connected over the people. And they're using our money to implement it. In Texas last week, the University of Texas at Austin received a grant from the TEA to the School of Social Work to implement what is called the implementation of restorative discipline. The TEA gave UT $521,000 to implement this, working through a partnership through public school, public middle school. These things are happening in a state where we said no to Common Core. Does that, or does it not, Robin, prove exactly what you're saying? These things are being implemented, and these people are the ones implementing it, but it has nothing to do with political strife.
Well, what they're doing in Texas is they're coming in through the mayors, they're coming in through the school districts. Austin is a part of an urban school consortium that is developing social and emotional learning competencies for all the other school systems in the country. So well, no, you're not part of Common Core, but you're part of all the other things that everywhere else are coming in under the banner of Common Core. A lot of times that I will see somebody from the Dallas school system, somebody from the Houston school system, somebody from Austin, and they come and participate just like they're huge systems. Somebody that would come in from a state education agency in other places. You've got I mentioned the League of Innovative Schools. They are coming to Dallas as part of, they're going to various school districts. They went to Raleigh last week. They're coming to Atlanta. I think like 14 or 15 school districts around the country where school superintendents and leaders who are really excited about the Digital Learning Initiative and the League of Innovative Schools policies and what's called Digital Promise, all this really cutting edge stuff. Well, they're coming to Texas, so y'all are getting a lot of the federal programs. You just didn't adopt the Common Core State Standards Initiative itself. You've got Grant Wiggins, who created Understanding by Design, and he may have an apartment. He's in Texas so often, doing professional development training of the teachers. But school superintendents don't have to get anybody's permission to push this stuff, really. As long as they haven't made the accreditors unhappy, they got a great deal of power over what goes on in the classroom. And the problem is, I've gone about this, I figure out I read the books, I read the theories. They may have just gotten kind of a shorthand reference of what Understanding by Design was about. I'll read the book, So I understand this stuff not in terms of, when you look at a lot of education degree programs, not criticizing people with an education degree. I have a lot of education professors who read my stuff and are very frustrated about what they've been pushed through. The programs themselves now will say that the person is competent to be a change agent. And they have a doctorate on the basis of being competent to be a change agent, which means that they are pushing the implementation of practices and policies they don't have a good intellectual understanding of underneath. So that when they're told that we have these new theories and it's about the new learning theories and it's about brain-based learning and activity is a much better way to go about it in the classroom because you remember it better. They go, okay. They haven't read the underlying documents, which are very clear about the real purpose of pushing digital learning and activity-based education in the classroom, which is that instead of using the analytical left part of your brain, which is what gets built up when you read phonetically, it's what gets built up in traditional math, it's what gets built up in traditional chemistry, it's that sequential process. They're pushing you to use different neural pathways, literally. The documents say that they're hoping that the students during the K-12 engaged in these practices will literally grow different neural pathways in their brain that they will then get habituated to using, and that those neural pathways will make them far more pliable. And the things that are in print about this are shocking, but they're not in print in one place. Once you sort of catch on to the fact that they're pushing you to use a different part of the brain, I'll track the research over to what the OECD that pushes the PISA test. They've got a unit called CERI, C-E-R-I. The stuff CERI has put into print that then tracks all the way back to the practices and books that your local school superintendent may very well unknowingly be pushing in the classroom. He knows he's pushing those policies and practices, but he has no idea what ultimately is involved in them. He just knows that's tied to keeping his job, getting the promotion he wants, etc. But the point I try to make repeatedly is you can be an inadvertent change agent in education today. If you are pushing policies and practices, the fact that you're not familiar in the least with what they were designed to do and achieve doesn't change that outcome. So when you're pushing these policies and practices that are literally designed to rewire children's brains or wire it that way in the first place so that they act at an unconscious level in predictable ways, that comes with the policies and practices, even if your classroom teacher doesn't know that, even if their ed professor didn't know that, even if your school superintendent doesn't know that, even if your state school superintendent doesn't know that. So this is an area now where it's really dangerous. They'll say, we're the professionals. You can't. And my attitude is, you have a degree. If you've got somebody who's got this level of knowledge, well, we'll talk about it, but don't ask me to just defer to your degree when over and over again, if you ask a follow-up question, these school superintendents or their staff make it very clear they don't have an intellectual understanding of the policies and practices they're pushing in the classroom.
Well, and you're exactly right. And what's interesting about Texas is we have these nonprofit organizations, these associations like TASA, Texas Association of School Administrators, TASB, Texas Association of School Board, who are implementing this. It's interesting to note that back in 2001, I believe it was, TASA received $6.3 million from the Gates Foundation specifically for professional development of superintendents for implementing technology in the classroom. And you look at what's happening, and it just all ties together. And when you start shining a light on it, I was telling Josh and Rebecca, I got an email yesterday. There was someone that just happened to attend the PTA council meeting in Carrollton Farmers Branch ISD, where the superintendent was hosting a guy named Bennett Ratliff, whose brother happens to be Thomas Ratliff, who's on the State Board of Education and a paid lobbyist with Microsoft, and whose father is Bill Ratliff, former lieutenant governor, former state senator, who's written legislation and implemented a lot that's put us in this place down the road. Anyway, Bennett Ratliff was the keynote speaker. And in his PowerPoint presentation, he talks about, you have to be engaged, and the people who make the decisions are the people that show up, and that he was trying to rally the PTA council members to go down and lobby and follow groups like TASA and TASB and another called TAMSA. And then on his next slide, it had a logo of Voices in Power, which is my own personal blog and website, a photo of me with my name on a very large screen that said complete deception and deceit.
Well, if they bother to mention you, Alice, you're doing something right. Right?
So this person sent me a message and said exactly that. You must be doing something right because, but as another friend of mine told me, the beauty of this is that they're trying to make this to be about me and go after me, which is fine, whatever. But the beautiful thing is that it's not about me, and they can try to take me out, but there is this huge grassroots swell of moms and dads and grandparents and taxpayers who have come into this battle just like you did, Robin, frankly, by accident and paying attention and caring about, the education of your children. That's how I came into it, by accident. Ginger Russell, all of us, Donna Gardner, we're all in it, and it's not because we're paid lobbyists. It's because we're moms and grandparents. And Robin, don't you think, and I think you've said it before, shining the light, that's what will stop this.
Yeah,
or
sunlight's
sunlight's
the only way out. Sunlight is the only way out of this vision. And, it all fits together because it was all designed to fit together. It was all designed to take us to a common point. But the point it's taking us to is an economy that absolutely will not work, and it's a lack of prosperity for the most part for anybody. But we're dealing with people who, nothing against them again, have by and large lived their adult lives at taxpayer expense. They do not understand what it took to generate those taxes that they live off of. And they don't understand that they are actually wrecking what they rely on. And so, seeing the vision, tied it all together, and we're going to either reach to the point of understanding this won't work on the front end, which is kind of still where we are now, or we'll be looking at the disaster 5 years from now going, what happened? And I don't want it to be 5 years from now. I think what I know will still be relevant 5 years from now, because this is all coming together. But I want to talk about it on the front end. I want to try to get as many parents as possible to teach their child how to read properly, keep those doors open, to appreciate there's such an emphasis on social and emotional learning. If your child comes from home with a logical mind, they will be targeted, they will be frustrated, and they need you to be their port in the storm and appreciate what school's going to be like for them, because they're going to be processing what they hear in ways they're going to have a fixed mindset because they actually know things. And they're supposed to have a malleable mindset. And so your kids you can take steps to protect them, and you can also be what they need to cry, the shoulder they need to cry on, because you understand what's been targeted, why, how it's being done. And it's not obnoxious to know this stuff really, really well. I mean, the teachers are some of my, the people who write to me. You wouldn't believe how many teachers reached out to me during the Christmas holidays to tell me how much my work meant to them, that I was like a lifeline to them, because it told them why they were being asked to do what they were being asked to do, and that somebody understood, and it gave them hope. And they wanted to wish me and my family a Merry Christmas. I mean, it wasn't just one or two. It was like 20 or 30 teachers. None of them have anything to do with each other. All within that week before Christmas, just sending me an email. It was amazing, and I didn't know any of them.
Well, and we're about out of time, but I have to tell the story because I think it's so funny and amazing and wonderful. Right after. I guess it was before we were going to meet in person, and then after I had really started digging into your book, and I get this letter in the mail, and it's anonymous, and it basically is telling me that the dots can be connected in this book, Credentialed to Destroy, by this lady, Robin Eubanks. And this person said, I Googled you, and you're someone of influence online, and this book will connect the dots for you. And I was like, Robin, you're not going to believe this. I scanned it and sent it to Robin, because that's what's happening. That's Grassroots for you. That's our hope. And I want to encourage everyone to buy a copy of Robin's book, Credentialed to Destroy, How and Why Education Became a Weapon. Buy a copy of this book for your school board members in your local school board. Buy a copy of this book for your children's teacher, just like Robin said. people like that who are on the inside, if they are given this information, then they will have the tools to hold the line and stand up in our local community schools. And I truly believe that is the answer. We are out of time. Robin, do you have any closing thoughts that you want to give before we get off the air?
No, I'm glad you had me on, and I truly, given all the coincidences involved with me being in the places I have been invited to and the people I've been introduced to, and just the sheer timeliness at which I stumble across these ideas like progressive federalism that so clearly matter to what's going on. I'm supposed to know this story, and I'm supposed to tell this story, and that's what I'm trying to do, because that's the only way to protect our children. And I've obviously stepped in and protected my own children from knowing this, and I want to give as many people as possible the opportunity to protect, because this is a terrible vision, and it's an evil vision, but it's not being pushed necessarily by evil people. And knowledge is the way out. Being forthright with the facts is the way out. It's funny that you were accused of deceit and deception. That's the opposite of what you're doing. But in this area, you frequently find that people call you the terms that best describe their own actions. So,
yeah. Right.
But yeah, thanks for having me on. And, I spend a fair amount of every day answering questions either on the blog or offline with people bringing particular incidents, and there's a tremendous commonality around the country with what's going on.
Thanks,
well,
Robin.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Rebecca and Josh. Do y'all have any closing thoughts, and we'll close out the show?
Alice, we were just sitting here talking about grassroots activism before we started the show, and I know we're kind of running over, and I don't know if Josh will be able to get this in or not, but another thing that's been happening, the grassroots again in Texas has risen up and tried to do something on the immigration and border security disaster that's going on here. And I think probably most people know that the Texas federal district judge issued a temporary injunction against Obama's unilateral amnesty orders, basically, on Monday. And it was Judge Andrew Hanen, I believe is how his name is pronounced. And it's a temporary stay. It's not a ruling on the merits, but it was brought by the 26 states, headed by Texas, with our former Attorney General, Greg Abbott, who is now our governor. And so that's a victory for us. And we're hoping that will open the door for some other things to try to stop this horrible executive order that he's issued. And the reason I sort of brought this up was because there was a conference call on Sunday with Joanne Fleming and Dale Hulls to discuss what's going on in Texas specifically about the border issue. And they were just reminding us that we need to make sure that we get money in the Texas budget to deal with keeping the border secure, because it's about to run out. And of course, the federal government is doing absolutely nothing as usual. So Joanne was talking about the fact that the Guard that was originally deployed, the National Guard, back in August, I believe, I think there were 1,000 initially deployed, is now down to 200, and I believe that was going to be ended this month in February. So the troop deployment budget runs out in March. So we need to push our Texas legislators to add that budgeting into the supplemental. And then also we need to keep state troopers and National Guard in place on the border until the next biennium budget that funds the border security plan. And of course, Joe Straus, as usual, is in the big middle of trying to, have a roadblock. The Senate has a bill that has $284 million for DPS and National Guard that's split, and it also allows for them to decide how to spend that money. and it includes the creation of a new DPS border security region. The House bill, amazingly enough, contains no money for continued National Guard deployment. So Joanne was asking all of us to start calling the key committees. I believe it was Homeland Security and Public Safety, Ways and Means, and the subcommittee on House Appropriations to make them, make sure they understand that we want them to continue to fund the border security that we need on the Texas border. The other thing that they discussed was an interstate compact, which I think is a brilliant idea to deal with the immigration issue. And Dale Hull's Clear Lake Tea Party, along with Grassroots America and T-Fire, came up with this plan. So I think Women on the Wall for sure will be posting that plan on the website. It's really, I think, a great idea, and especially since we already had 26 states that joined in that lawsuit. And it's something that we might even consider looking at on education, because as I was sitting here reading over what can be done with interstate compacts, which have been around for a very long time, it seems that education might be something that we could also try to implement something like that on. So again, we'll post all of this on Women on the Wall, and hopefully people will read over their plan, because I think it might actually work now that we have a Republican majority in Washington.
Great. Hopefully
Yeah.
those Republicans are actually listening, and I think it's because of work by Joanne and Dale and so many others. I know Ray's been on the ground talking to different groups, and there's folks going around to the different grassroots meetings and taking this information out. And you're right. It's there's one guy, he told me, Weston told me this one time, he said, sometimes we're not going to change the people who are in positions of power. Our job is to change them because of our power within the grassroots.
Right.
So I believe that that's truly the answer. So, well, thank you so much, Rebecca. Thank you so much, Josh. And thank you to all those grassroots folks, and especially thank you to Robin for being with us on the call today, or on the show. And we will just go forth and keep walking forward. That's the goal.
Okay. Be safe in your travels. Thanks, Josh.
I will. Thank you. Y'all too. Have a great day.
Till next
Bye-bye.
week. Bye.